Okay, so New York City. I mean, just saying the name, it like brings up so many images and feelings. And, we've been getting a lot of questions about what exactly makes this place so legendary. And, well, we found a great jumping off point. This really fun chat on the City Vibes podcast with the hosts, Drew and Emily.
Yeah, they really captured something about the heart of New York through their own experiences there. And, what we're going to do today is we're going to pull out some of the most fascinating things from their conversation. And we're going to look at everything from that first, rush you get when you arrive to the food scene, the culture, and some of those kind of off the beaten path spots that maybe even people who've been there a few times might miss.
Okay, love it. So let's dive right in. And actually, Drew from City Vibes had this really vivid description of his first time stepping out of Penn Station. And he talked about being just bombarded by all these sounds and people and these huge billboards. He's like, you step out and bam, you're in a movie.
Yeah, that feeling of being instantly immersed, it's so true to the New York experience, right?
And Emily talked about that movie set vibe too. She mentioned those classic yellow cabs, the steam rising from the streets, almost like the city itself is breathing, and just this constant energy and motion everywhere. It's a place that doesn't really ease you in.
No, it throws you right in. And when you picture that movie set, probably Times Square is the first thing that pops into your head, right? It's definitely a symbol, right? And Drew and Emily both talked about how iconic it is and how it's almost like a pilgrimage for first-time visitors.
Yeah, totally. All those dazzling lights and those massive screens. It's a real spectacle, for sure.
Totally. But what's interesting is that they also talked about this contrast between that initial awe and how people who actually live in New York experience Times Square. Right, right. It's almost like Emily mentioned that a lot of New Yorkers will actually avoid Times Square altogether because it's just so crowded. So it makes you think about these globally famous landmarks, Are they really part of daily life in the city, or are they more like these separate, almost theatrical spaces?
That's a really good point. It's like the image becomes bigger than the reality for the people who actually live there. But Drew did have a great tip for experiencing Times Square without all the craziness. He said if you can get there early in the morning, really early, you can see it almost empty. And it gives you a totally different perspective.
Oh, I bet. That'd be amazing.
Yeah. Now, speaking of finding a different vibe, let's talk about Central Park. Both Drew and Emily described it as this incredible green escape right in the middle of all that Manhattan concrete.
Yeah, and when they say escape, they mean it. They talked about how massive it is, 840 acres. That's not just a park, it's practically its own little world. They talked about biking, jogging, having picnics, boating, you name it. You could spend days in there and not see everything.
Oh, for sure. Emily actually mentioned walking through the Bethesda Terrace and how beautiful it is. And, you instantly picture it, right? You've seen it in a million movies and shows.
Oh, absolutely. And Drew even rattled off a bunch of them. Home Alone 2, The Avengers, Gossip Girl. It's crazy how these places become so familiar to us through the screen, even if we've never actually been there.
Totally. Okay, so let's switch gears a bit from the visual landmarks to the live performance scene. Drew brought up Broadway, and they both agreed that it's a must-see New York experience.
For sure. Emily talked about seeing The Lion King and Hamilton, and she was just gushing about the talent and the music and just the whole spectacle of it all.
And what's cool is that they also talked about how accessible Broadway can be. Drew pointed out that you don't have to be some huge theater buff to appreciate the experience.
Right.
And more importantly, they talked about practical stuff, like finding discount tickets at the TKTS booths or using those lottery apps.
Yeah, those are great tips. It definitely makes it more attainable for people who might not have a Broadway-sized budget.
Totally. Okay, now let's talk about something that's really fundamental to the New York experience: the food. Emily pretty much declared New York City the food capital of the U.S., and they both immediately jumped into talking about what they called the big three: pizza, bagels, and street hot dogs.
I mean, where do you even begin with all the amazing food in New York?
Yeah.
But yeah, those three are definitely iconic.
Oh, for sure. So, pizza. They talked about how New York-style pizza is just different with that thin, foldable crust, the perfect cheese to sauce ratio. It's like its own category, right? Drew even mentioned how you can still find a decent slice for around $1, which is pretty amazing in this day and age.
That's a steal.
I know, right? And Emily had a specific place that she loves: Joe's Pizza in Greenwich Village. She called it a classic, always delicious, always fresh.
It's those neighborhood places that often have the best food.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, now bagels. They talked about this whole mystique surrounding New York City bagels and this idea that there's something in the city's water that makes them so chewy.
Yeah. It's like a local legend. Whether it's true or not, it definitely adds to their appeal.
Totally. And they even shared their go-to bagel orders. Drew loves an everything bagel with scallion cream cheese.
Classic.
And Emily prefers a sesame bagel with lox and cream cheese.
That's a good one, too.
Right. It's funny how these seemingly simple foods become so tied to the city's identity.
It's like everyone has their own personal connection to them.
Okay, so let's get a little bit off the beaten path. Drew and Emily also talked about some hidden gems and local favorites. Emily was really enthusiastic about D'Amelio in Brooklyn. She talked about the incredible views of the Manhattan skyline from there, the cute cafes, and that spot where you can get that iconic photo of the Manhattan Bridge framing the street.
DMAO is really cool. It's a great example of how the outer boroughs are becoming destinations in their own right. You know, they have their own unique character. And as Emily said, often you get those amazing views of Manhattan that you can't get when you're actually in Manhattan.
Exactly. Drew's hidden gem was Roosevelt Island, which you can get to by this aerial tramway that goes over the East River. He said the views of the city from the tram are just insane, which sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah, that tram ride sounds like a really unique way to experience the city. It's like you're getting a different perspective, but you're still surrounded by all that urban energy.
And for all the bookworms out there, Emily gave a shout out to the Strand bookstore, which Drew called an 18-mile haven for book lovers. Can you imagine that many books in one place?
That's mind-blowing. The Strand is practically a New York institution, right? It's like a pilgrimage for book lovers.
Okay, before wrapping up their chat on city vibes, Drew and Emily gave a few essential tips for anyone planning a trip to New York. First and foremost, wear comfortable shoes.
Yes, they really emphasize that one. New York is a walking city. You're going to be doing a lot of exploring on foot.
Absolutely. Their second tip was to familiarize yourself with the subway system. They said it's the fastest and most affordable way to get around, which makes sense in such a big city.
The subway is like the lifeline of New York, right? It connects all those different neighborhoods and lets you experience the city like a local.
They also encourage people to explore beyond Manhattan, to check out Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx. All those boroughs have something unique to offer.
That's so important. It's easy to get caught up in the touristy areas of Manhattan, but there's so much more to New York beyond that.
Absolutely. And their final tip was to look for those local restaurants for authentic and delicious food and maybe avoid some of the more obvious tourist traps.
Yeah, we already covered that with the pizza and bagel obsession.
Right. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into New York City, inspired by Drew and Emily's conversation on city vibes, we've covered a lot of ground. Those intense first impressions, the iconic sights, the amazing culture, that food that everyone raves about, some really cool hidden gems, and even some practical tips for navigating it all. It's no wonder New York City has such a powerful hold on people's imaginations worldwide, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about why these particular aspects of New York resonate so much with people. Is it just the sheer energy and ambition that you feel everywhere? Is it the mix of cultures? Or is it the way those iconic images have been shared globally for so long? You know, each piece, from the sensory overload to something as simple as a perfect New York bagel, they all contribute to this really complex and compelling identity.
You know, it really makes you think, doesn't it? When you consider all the different perspectives and experiences that are happening in just one city like New York, what other places that we think we know well might have these surprising layers and hidden stories just waiting to be discovered? Maybe that's a question for our next deep dive.
I love it. Let's do it.
All right, until next time.
See ya.